It was a cold, rainy morning in Atlanta when the story began. A man stepped out of his car, dressed in a sharp suit that screamed success. But this wasn't always his life. Not too long ago, he was just another kid growing up in a small neighborhood, where dreams often felt like distant stars, beautiful but unreachable. This man had grown up in a house with peeling paint and creaky floors. His parents worked hard, 2 jobs each, to make ends meet. They didn't have much, but they gave him something far more valuable: belief. You can be anything you want, his mother would say every night before bed. Those words stuck with him, even though the world outside their home didn't seem to agree. School was tough. Teachers praised his grades, but some classmates teased him for being different. He wore hand-me-down clothes while others sported brand-new sneakers. Still, he kept his head down and focused on what mattered most: education. It became his ticket to a better future. Years passed, and he clawed his way through college, working late shifts at a diner to pay tuition. After graduation, he applied to dozens of companies, hoping to land a job. But rejection after rejection came his way. Some employers told him outright they weren't interested. Others never called back. Deep down, he knew it wasn't just about qualifications. It was about how people saw him. That frustration turned into fuel. Instead of waiting for someone else to give him a chance, he decided to create his own opportunities. With nothing but grit and a laptop, he started a small tech company. At first, it was just him in a tiny rented office, coding late into the night. Slowly, things started to change. Clients noticed his work ethic, his vision, and his ability to solve problems no one else could. Word spread, and soon, his little startup grew into something bigger, a global powerhouse. Fast forward 15 years, and here he was now, standing tall as the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. His name was known across industries. People respected him, or so he thought. One day, during a business trip to New York City, he checked into a luxurious hotel. The lobby gleamed with marble floors and sparkling chandeliers. As he handed over his black credit card to pay for his stay, the young clerk behind the counter raised an eyebrow. Then came the laugh, a snicker, barely loud enough for others to hear, but loud enough to cut deep. "Is this supposed to be funny?" the clerk said, holding up the card as if it were a joke prop. "Does this even work?" The room froze for a moment. The businessman felt heat rise to his face. He'd seen reactions like this before at restaurants, stores, even airports, but somehow this sting felt sharper. Maybe it was because he was tired. Maybe it was because he'd worked so hard to get where he was today. Or maybe it was because, despite all his success, moments like these reminded him of how far society still needed to go. He took a deep breath and forced a smile. "Yes, it works," he said calmly, his voice steady. The clerk processed the payment without another word, but the damage was done. That laugh lingered in his mind long after he left the counter. Later that evening, sitting alone in his hotel room, he replayed the scene over and over again. Was it really about the card? Or was it about him? About the color of his skin? About the assumptions people made before they even knew his name? Little did he know, this incident would set off a chain of events that would shake not only his life, but also the entire corporate world. For now, though, he simply stared out the window at the glittering city below, wondering how many more times he'd have to prove himself, not just as a businessman, but as a human being worthy of respect. And somewhere deep inside, a decision was brewing. A decision that would remind everyone exactly who he was and why they should never underestimate him again. The next morning, the businessman stepped into a sleek skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. The air buzzed with energy as people rushed past him, clutching coffee cups and briefcases. He was here for the biggest meeting of his career, a $2.8 billion merger deal with one of Europe's oldest conglomerates. This wasn't just about money, it was about legacy. His company had spent years proving itself in an industry dominated by giants, and this partnership would cement its place on the global stage. As he entered the boardroom, the atmosphere shifted slightly. The executives from the European firm Vantage Corp were already seated around the table. They greeted him politely, but there was something off in their tone. Their smiles were tight, their handshakes quick. One man, older with silver hair and a tailored suit, gestured for him to sit at the far end of the table, almost like they wanted to keep some distance between them. The meeting began smoothly enough. Charts and graphs filled the screen as both sides discussed numbers, projections, and strategies. But soon, subtle cracks started to show. When he suggested a new approach to streamline operations, one executive leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Interesting idea," the man said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But I'm not sure someone without our experience could fully grasp the complexities." His jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. These kinds of comments weren't new to him. Over the years, he'd learned to navigate rooms where people doubted him before he even opened his mouth. Still, each jab felt like a pebble being dropped into still water, small ripples that added up over time. Things got worse during lunch. The group moved to a private dining area, where waiters served gourmet meals on pristine white plates. As they ate, the conversation turned casual, or so it seemed. Someone brought up the topic of credit cards, joking about how easy it was to max out limits these days. That's when another executive chimed in, pointing a fork in his direction. "Speaking of cards," the man said with a chuckle, "I heard you tried pulling out some kind of novelty card yesterday." He glanced at the others, who laughed awkwardly. "You know, the ones you get in cereal boxes, or is it part of your branding now?" The room fell silent for a split second before everyone joined in on the laughter. Even those who didn't find it funny forced a smile, afraid to stand out. The businessman sat there, gripping his glass of water tightly. His mind raced. Should he call them out? Walk out right then and there? No, he decided. Not yet. He needed to see how far they'd go. Instead, he smiled faintly and replied, "Oh, it's real. Trust me, it works just fine." His voice was calm, almost playful, but his eyes told a different story. There was fire behind them, a quiet determination that said louder than words, "You'll regret this." After lunch, the group returned to the boardroom to finalize the paperwork. By this point, the businessman had made up his mind. Every snide remark, every dismissive glance, it all added up to something bigger than any single insult. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who'd ever been underestimated because of where they came from or what they looked like, and he refused to let it slide. When the documents were placed in front of him, pen ready, he paused. Everyone waited, expecting him to sign. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. The room grew quiet, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. "I've decided," he began, his voice steady but commanding, "that I won't be moving forward with this deal." For a moment, no one reacted. Then chaos erupted. Chairs scraped against the floor as executives shot to their feet. "What do you mean?" one of them demanded, his face red with anger. "Do you have any idea what this will cost us?" He stood up, towering over the table despite his average height. "I know exactly what it will cost you," he said. "And maybe that's the point. Maybe it's time you understand that respect isn't something you can buy or mock away." With that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving stunned faces behind. Outside, the city buzzed with life, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside that building. As he stepped into the elevator, he pulled out his phone and sent a single text. "Release the recording." Hours later, the audio of the meeting leaked online. Social media exploded. People couldn't believe what they were hearing. How could a group of top executives behave this way in 2023? The clip spread like wildfire, sparking debates about bias, privilege, and accountability in corporate culture. Hashtags like "respect in business" and "no more mockery" trended worldwide. Back in his hotel room, the businessman watched the reactions unfold on his laptop. Messages poured in from colleagues, friends, and strangers alike. Some praised his courage. Others shared their own stories of discrimination. For the first time in days, he allowed himself a small smile. What happened in that boardroom wasn't just about him. It was about sending a message that said loud and clear, "Enough is enough." As night fell over New York City, he stared out the window once more. The lights twinkled below, endless and unyielding, much like the resolve he felt within himself. Tomorrow would bring challenges, questions, and perhaps even backlash. But for now, he knew one thing for certain. He'd done the right thing. And sometimes, doing the right thing is all that matters. The next morning, the businessman woke up to a storm. Not the kind you see outside your window, but the kind that ripples across headlines, social media feeds, and news channels. The recording of the boardroom mockery had gone viral overnight, and the world was watching. Phones buzzed nonstop with notifications. Reporters camped outside his hotel, microphones in hand, desperate for a comment. And in the middle of it all, he sat quietly in his room, scrolling through the chaos unfolding on his screen. At first glance, the reactions seemed overwhelmingly supportive. People were outraged, furious even, at how the executives had treated him. Comments flooded in from every corner of the globe. "This is why we need more diversity in leadership," one person wrote. Another added, "He didn't just walk away, he stood up for all of us." Even celebrities weighed in, sharing their own stories of being underestimated or dismissed because of who they were. It felt like the entire internet had rallied behind him, but not everyone agreed. Some critics argued that canceling such a massive deal was reckless. "Emotions shouldn't dictate business decisions," one analyst said during a live TV segment. Others accused him of using the incident as a publicity stunt. "Why release the recording?" they asked. "Isn't this just about playing the victim card?" Despite the noise, he stayed calm. He knew controversy came with the territory when you took a stand. What mattered most wasn't what strangers thought. It was staying true to himself. After hours of silence, he decided it was time to speak. He reached out to a trusted journalist known for covering underrepresented voices in business. If he was going to tell his side of the story, he wanted it to be done right. Later that evening, cameras rolled as he sat down for an exclusive interview. Dressed simply in a dark blazer and jeans, he looked directly into the lens, his expression steady but sincere. When the journalist asked why he walked away from the $2.8 billion deal, he didn't hesitate. "It's not about the money," he said firmly. "I've worked too hard to let anyone treat me, or my team, as anything less than equal. Respect isn't optional. It's non-negotiable." His words hit hard. They weren't polished or rehearsed. They came straight from the heart. He talked about growing up poor, fighting for opportunities others took for granted, and learning early on that success wouldn't shield him from prejudice. He admitted that moments like the one in the boardroom still stung, no matter how much he achieved. But instead of letting bitterness consume him, he chose to channel it into action. "I'm not here to beg for respect," he continued. "I'm here to demand it. And if walking away from a bad partnership helps send that message, then so be it." By the end of the interview, millions had tuned in. Social media erupted again, this time with renewed admiration. Supporters called him a hero, a trailblazer, someone who refused to compromise his values for profit. Brands and organizations scrambled to align themselves with his cause, offering partnerships and sponsorships. Meanwhile, Vantage Corp's stock plummeted. Their PR team issued a rushed apology, calling the incident a misunderstanding. But no one bought it, not after hearing the recording for themselves. As the days passed, the fallout grew worse. For Vantage Corp, major investors pulled out, citing concerns over the company's leadership culture. Employees spoke out anonymously, claiming discrimination and toxic behavior within the organization. News outlets dug deeper, uncovering past lawsuits and scandals buried beneath layers of corporate polish. The once respected conglomerate found itself drowning in controversy, while the man at the center of it all emerged stronger than ever. Back in Atlanta, where his journey began, people celebrated his courage. Friends and family reached out, proud of how far he'd come, and amazed by how he handled himself during the ordeal. His parents, now retired, watched the interview together. His mother wiped tears from her eyes as she listened to him talk about the struggles they faced raising him. "That's my boy," she whispered to her husband, always standing tall. One afternoon, he returned to the neighborhood where he grew up. Walking through familiar streets brought back memories, both good and bad. He stopped by the local community center, where kids played basketball and dreamed big dreams. Standing there, surrounded by laughter and chatter, he realized something important. This fight wasn't just about him anymore. It was about creating a path for others who might face the same obstacles he did. That evening, he made a decision. Using part of his personal wealth, he announced the launch of a new initiative aimed at supporting minority entrepreneurs. Dubbed the Equity Fund, it would provide grants, mentorship, and resources to startups led by underrepresented founders. The goal was simple: to level the playing field, one business at a time. News of the fund spread quickly, drawing attention from around the world. Applications poured in from aspiring entrepreneurs eager to break barriers in industries long dominated by privilege. For many, this wasn't just financial support, it was validation, proof that their ideas mattered regardless of where they came from or what they looked like. In the weeks that followed, invitations arrived from prestigious conferences, universities, and think tanks. Everyone wanted to hear his story, to learn from his experience. Yet despite the accolades, he remained grounded. Success hadn't changed him. It had only deepened his commitment to making a difference. Late one night, as he reflected on everything that had happened, he thought about the young clerk at the hotel. The laugh, the smirk, the assumption that his black card was a joke. It all seemed so small now. But he understood that it wasn't really about the clerk. It was about the system that allowed such attitudes to exist unchecked and unchallenged. Breaking that system wouldn't happen overnight, but he was determined to try. As he closed his laptop and turned off the light, he smiled to himself. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But one thing was certain. He'd proven that walking away from disrespect could lead to something far greater than any deal, a chance to rewrite the rules and inspire others to do the same. The storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. The businessman had ignited a firestorm that refused to die down. Every day brought new twists, new reactions, and new challenges. While some praised his bold move, others scrutinized him under a microscope, dissecting every decision he made. But through it all, he stood firm, knowing deep down that what he'd done was about more than just himself. Vantage Corp was crumbling under the weight of public outrage. Once revered as a pillar of corporate excellence, the company now found itself at the center of a global scandal. Employees spoke out anonymously on social media platforms, sharing stories of bias, favoritism, and discrimination within its ranks. One former worker described how she was passed over for promotions despite stellar performance, simply because her superiors didn't see her as leadership material. Another recounted being mocked during meetings for suggesting ideas outside the norm. These accounts painted a damning picture of a toxic culture hidden behind polished boardrooms and press releases. As the truth came to light, major investors began pulling out. Hedge funds dumped shares in droves, sending Vantage Corp's stock into freefall. Analysts scrambled to explain the sudden collapse, but the writing was on the wall. Trust had been broken, and rebuilding it wouldn't be easy. The CEO of Vantage Corp issued yet another apology, this time appearing on live television to plead for understanding. "We are committed to change," he said, looking directly into the camera. But his words rang hollow against the backdrop of leaked emails and internal documents proving systemic issues within the company. Meanwhile, the businessman became a symbol of resilience and defiance. Social media buzzed with memes and hashtags celebrating his decision. People shared videos of his interview, quoting lines like, "Respect isn't optional, it's non-negotiable." Even late-night talk show hosts weighed in, using humor to highlight the absurdity of what had happened. "You don't laugh at someone's card unless you're ready to lose $2.8 billion, one comedian quipped, earning thunderous applause from the audience. But not everyone joined the chorus of support. Critics argued that canceling such a massive deal wasn't practical. "Emotions shouldn't trump business sense," one pundit declared during a heated panel discussion. Others accused him of grandstanding, claiming he released the audio clip purely for attention. Some even suggested he should have ignored the insult and focused on the bottom line. In the real world, one analyst wrote, "You take the money and move on." He didn't respond to these accusations publicly. Instead, he let his actions speak louder than any rebuttal could. Days after the fallout, he announced the creation of the Equity Fund, a groundbreaking initiative aimed at leveling the playing field for minority entrepreneurs. With an initial investment of $500 million from his own pocket, the fund would provide grants, mentorship, and resources to startups led by underrepresented founders. The announcement sent shockwaves through the business community, drawing praise from activists, academics, and industry leaders alike. Applications poured in almost immediately. Entrepreneurs from across the globe submitted pitches, each one brimming with passion and potential. A young woman from Nigeria dreamed of building affordable solar panels for rural communities. A tech whiz from Detroit wanted to create an app connecting underserved neighborhoods with job opportunities. A father-son duo in India sought funding to scale their eco-friendly packaging solution. For many of these applicants, the Equity Fund represented more than financial backing. It was validation. Proof that their dreams mattered, no matter where they came from or what obstacles they faced. To ensure transparency and fairness, the businessman assembled a diverse advisory board to oversee the selection process. Members included seasoned entrepreneurs, academics, and community leaders who understood the unique challenges faced by marginalized groups. Together, they crafted a rigorous yet inclusive evaluation system designed to identify promising ventures while fostering long-term success. Amidst the whirlwind of activity, he remained grounded. Success hadn't changed him. If anything, it had deepened his resolve. Late one evening, as he sat alone in his office, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. Growing up poor in Atlanta, he never imagined he'd find himself at the center of a global movement. Yet here he was, fighting battles bigger than himself, inspiring others to do the same. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, colleagues, and strangers thanking him for standing up. One message stood out, a letter from a high school student in Chicago. "I want to be like you when I grow up," the boy wrote. "You showed me that it's okay to stand up for yourself, even if people try to make you feel small." Reading. Those words filled him with both pride and responsibility. He realized that his actions weren't just about making headlines. They were about planting seeds. Seeds of hope, courage, and possibility. Each person inspired by his story carried the potential to spark change in their own corner of the world. One afternoon, he returned to the hotel where it all began. Walking into the lobby, he noticed the same clerk who had laughed at his black card months earlier. This time, however, the young man looked nervous, almost apologetic. "Sir," he stammered, I'm sorry about before. I didn't mean..." The businessman raised a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. "It's fine," he said calmly. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next." With that, he handed the clerk a flyer advertising the Equity Fund. "If you ever have a dream you want to chase, reach out. We're here to help." The clerk stared at the flyer wide-eyed before nodding slowly. "Thank you, sir. I won't forget this." As he walked away, the businessman felt a sense of closure. The incident at the hotel had started as a personal affront, but it had grown into something far greater, a catalyst for change. By refusing to accept disrespect, he had sparked conversations, challenged norms, and opened doors for countless others. That night, as he lay in bed, he thought about the road ahead. There would be more battles to fight, more barriers to break, but for now, he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. He had proven that walking away from disrespect wasn't just an act of defiance. It was an opportunity to build something better, something meaningful, something lasting. And in that moment, he knew the best was yet to come. The months following the Equity Fund's launch were a whirlwind of activity. The businessman had set a bold vision, but he quickly realized that turning it into reality would require more than just money. It would take time, effort, and relentless dedication. Every day brought new challenges, from vetting hundreds of applications to ensuring the fund operated with integrity and fairness. Yet, despite the pressure, he approached each task with the same determination that had carried him through his toughest moments. One morning, as he sat in his office reviewing pitches, he came across a proposal that caught his eye. It was from a young woman who wanted to create affordable childcare centers in low-income neighborhoods. Her story was raw and heartfelt. She explained how she'd grown up juggling schoolwork while caring for younger siblings because her parents couldn't afford daycare. "I want to give kids like mine a chance to dream bigger," she wrote. Reading those words reminded him of his own childhood, the sacrifices his family made so he could succeed. He marked her application for further review, knowing hers was exactly the kind of project the fund was meant to support. As word spread about the equity fund, it began attracting attention beyond entrepreneurs. Community leaders, activists, and even rival companies reached out, eager to collaborate. One tech giant offered to provide free software tools to help startups manage their operations. Another promised discounted cloud services for any business backed by the fund. These partnerships weren't just generous, they were proof that his decision to cancel the $2.8 billion deal hadn't isolated him. Instead, it had opened doors to meaningful connections rooted in shared values. But not everything went smoothly. Some critics questioned whether the fund was sustainable, pointing out that pouring $500 million into untested ventures carried significant risks. Others accused him of playing savior rather than empowering people to solve their own problems. While these comments stung, they also fueled his resolve. He knew change didn't happen without resistance, and if anything, the criticism pushed him to work harder. To address concerns about sustainability, he assembled a team of experts to design training programs for grantees. These workshops covered everything from financial planning to marketing strategies, equipping entrepreneurs with the skills needed to navigate the unpredictable world of business. Watching participants grow more confident week after week gave him a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about funding ideas, it was about building futures. Amidst the chaos, he found moments of clarity. Late one evening, as he drove home from the office, he passed through the old neighborhood where he grew up. The streets looked different now, brighter, livelier, but familiar enough to stir memories. He parked near the corner store where he used to buy snacks with coins saved from odd jobs. Inside, the owner recognized him immediately. "Hey, isn't that you on TV?" the man asked, grinning widely. "You're making us proud, son." They chatted for a while, reminiscing about the past and marveling at how much had changed. Before leaving, the businessman handed the store owner a flyer for the equity fund. "If anyone around here has a dream, tell them we're ready to listen," he said. The shopkeeper nodded, promising to spread the word. Back at home, he spent hours reading letters sent by applicants. Each one told a unique story, some heartbreaking, others inspiring, but all underscored the importance of what he was doing. One letter stood out in particular. It was from a single father who dreamed of starting a mobile grocery service to bring fresh produce to food deserts. "You don't know what this means to me," the man wrote. "For the first time, someone believes I can make a difference." Reading those words filled him with a mix of emotions: pride, gratitude, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. He understood that every dollar invested carried weight, not just financially but emotionally. People weren't just looking for funding. They were seeking validation, hope, and a chance to rewrite their stories. Weeks later, he traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet with policymakers advocating for economic equity. Lawmakers praised his efforts, calling the equity fund a model for public-private partnerships aimed at closing racial wealth gaps. During a panel discussion, he spoke candidly about the systemic barriers blocking minority entrepreneurs. "It's not just about access to capital," he emphasized. "It's about changing mindsets, about believing in people who've been told they don't belong." His words resonated deeply, sparking conversations about policy reforms to support underrepresented founders. By the end of the trip, several legislators pledged to introduce bills addressing discriminatory lending practices and increasing resources for minority-owned businesses. For the first time, he felt hopeful that real, lasting change might be possible, not just within his reach but on a national scale. Despite the progress, there were still days when doubt crept in, nights when he lay awake wondering if he'd bitten off more than he could chew. Running the equity fund alongside his company was no small feat, and the demands often left him exhausted. But whenever uncertainty threatened to overwhelm him, he remembered why he started this journey in the first place. It wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about creating opportunities for those who deserved them most. One afternoon, he received an email from a grantee whose eco-friendly packaging startup had secured its first major client, a global retail chain. "We did it," she wrote. "None of this would have been possible without your belief in us." Attached was a photo of her team celebrating in their modest warehouse-turned-office. Smiling faces stared back at him, radiating joy and pride. In that moment, all the late nights, tough decisions, and sleepless worries faded away. What mattered was the impact, the lives touched, the dreams realized. By year's end, the equity fund had supported over 50 startups, each one contributing to communities in ways big and small. From affordable housing initiatives to innovative healthcare solutions, the ripple effects of his decision were undeniable. And though Vantage Corp continued to struggle, overshadowed by scandals and plummeting profits, he felt no regret. Walking away hadn't cost him a deal. It had given him a purpose. That New Year's Eve, surrounded by friends, family, and colleagues, he reflected on the past year. The laughter in the hotel lobby, the tension in the boardroom, the viral recording. All of it seemed distant now, like chapters in a book he'd already closed. Yet those moments remained etched in his memory, reminders of how far he'd come, and how much farther he intended to go. Raising a glass, he toasted to the future. "Here's to breaking barriers," he said, his voice steady but warm. "And building bridges." The room erupted in applause, but for him the loudest cheers came from within. He had proven that standing up for yourself wasn't just an act of defiance. It was an invitation to build something greater, something enduring, something worth fighting for. And he knew, deep down, that the best chapters of his story were yet to be written. 5 years had passed since that fateful day in the hotel lobby. The businessman stood on stage at a prestigious global business summit in Geneva, Switzerland, looking out at a sea of faces, executives, entrepreneurs, policymakers, and innovators from every corner of the world. The room was packed, buzzing with anticipation. He adjusted the microphone, took a deep breath, and began to speak. 5 years ago, he started, his voice calm but commanding. "I walked away from a $2.8 billion deal. Not because I didn't need the money, but because I couldn't tolerate disrespect." The audience leaned forward, hanging onto his every word. Some in the crowd remembered the incident vividly. Others were too young or too far removed to have experienced it firsthand. But everyone knew the story by now. It had become legend, a cautionary tale for those who underestimated the power of principle, and a beacon of hope for those fighting for fairness. He continued, "People often ask me if I regret it. Did I lose sleep over walking away? Did I worry about what others might think?" He paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make his point. "No, because respect isn't something you negotiate. You either give it, or you don't. Deserve mine." The room erupted into applause, but he raised a hand to quiet them. This wasn't about accolades. It never had been. What happened after that decision shaped not only my life, but also the lives of countless others. It taught me that true progress isn't measured in dollars or deals. It's measured in dignity, in creating spaces where people feel valued, seen, and heard. Behind him, a screen flickered to life, displaying images of the equity fund's impact. There was the young woman from Nigeria, now running a thriving solar energy company that powered entire villages. The tech whiz from Detroit, whose app had connected thousands of underserved job seekers with employers. The father-son duo from India, whose eco-friendly packaging solution had been adopted by major corporations worldwide. Each photo told a story of resilience, creativity, and triumph against all odds. "These aren't just success stories," he said, gesturing toward the screen. They're reminders of what happens when we stop seeing obstacles as dead ends and start viewing them as opportunities to build bridges. As he spoke, he noticed familiar faces scattered throughout the crowd. Some were grantees whose businesses had grown beyond their wildest dreams. Others were industry leaders who had initially dismissed him but now sought his advice. And then there were the skeptics, the ones who still whispered behind closed doors about whether his methods were sustainable. Even they couldn't deny the results. When he finished his speech, the applause was thunderous. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering as though they'd witnessed history, and in many ways they had. Afterward, reporters swarmed him with questions. What's next? How do you plan to expand the fund? Do you think corporate culture has changed since your stand 5 years ago? He answered patiently, knowing these conversations mattered. Change didn't happen overnight, and while strides had been made, there was still work to be done. Vantage Corp, for instance, had faded into obscurity, unable to recover from the scandals that followed its downfall. Other companies, however, had taken note, implementing diversity initiatives and reevaluating their hiring practices. Progress was slow, uneven, and imperfect, but it was progress nonetheless. That evening, as the summit wound down, he found himself reflecting on how far he'd come. Gone were the days of struggling to prove himself in rooms where he didn't belong. Now he commanded respect, not because of his wealth or title, but because of the values he embodied. Integrity, courage, empathy. Back at his hotel, he scrolled through messages pouring in from around the world. A teenager in Brazil thanked him for inspiring her to pursue engineering despite societal pressures. A retired teacher in South Africa shared how one of the equity fund's grantees had transformed her community through affordable internet access. Each message reminded him why he kept pushing forward, even when the road felt endless. Late that night, he stepped onto the balcony overlooking Lake Geneva. The water shimmered under the moonlight, peaceful, yet powerful. He thought about the clerk who had laughed at his black card all those years ago. He wondered if the young man ever realized how much that moment had changed both their lives. Probably not, and that was okay. Forgiveness didn't require acknowledgement, it required action. The next morning, he boarded a private jet bound for Atlanta. As the plane ascended, he opened a folder containing updates from the equity fund team. New applications had flooded in, each one brimming with potential. One proposal caught his eye, a former factory worker turned inventor who had designed a low-cost device to purify contaminated water. His heart raced with excitement. Here was another dream waiting to take flight. When the jet touched down, he drove straight to his childhood neighborhood. Pulling up to the community center where kids played basketball and dreamed big dreams, he smiled. Things looked different now. Bright murals adorned the walls, and a new STEM lab occupied what used to be an empty storage room, all funded by grants from the equity fund. Inside, he met with local leaders and aspiring entrepreneurs eager to share their ideas. Listening to their pitches, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was what it was all about. Not fame or fortune, but fostering a future where everyone had a fair shot at success. Later that week, news broke that Elix Global, the company he built from scratch, had surpassed a $10 billion valuation. Analysts hailed it as a testament to visionary leadership and innovative thinking. But to him, the milestone meant something simpler, proof that principles and profits could coexist. In the final scene, he sat at his desk, penning a letter to his younger self. "Dear me," he wrote, "you'll face moments that test your faith in humanity. Moments that make you question whether standing up is worth the cost. Trust me, it is. Because every time you choose dignity over doubt, you inspire someone else to do the same." Signing off, he folded the letter and placed it in a drawer alongside old photos and mementos. Outside, the city buzzed with life, vibrant and unyielding. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed, a sound so pure it echoed like hope itself. And in that moment he knew, the fight wasn't over, but neither was the dream.